Today we're going to do an activity where you practice doing your oral presentation, but in a much more condensed form as a way of understanding structure, purpose, and maintaining your focus on your thesis statement and the task. So, what you need are these three things. You need a purpose for speaking. Why are you talking to us? What end are you trying to achieve? What does the task ask you to do? In this case, when we're looking at the stuff of dreams, we're really looking at what in the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century was the Australian dream. How is it challenged or endorsed by your poet? And what we might understand about dreams, their limitations, and what people might think of them or how they might fit into it in their own ways. You need to find evidence in the text to support how you see your poet's attitude evolving in his or her poem. And you need to arrive at a conclusion. Specifically, your task asks us to look at the success to which your poet achieves his or her purpose. So here's a poem about Australia in the 20th century. Maris, in this particular poem, Spiritual Song of the Aborigine, looks at how her relationship with and Australia's Indigenous population's relationship with the land. I specifically am interested in this idea that I've got up here in red, the every when. The reason that interests me, and I've done a little bit of research on it and I've made reference to it below, is this idea that grammatically it's an impossible word, and so too is the broad nature of an Australian Aborigines' connection with the land, the sky, the earth, the spirits, the ancestors. There is no beginning, middle and end as Westerners might understand it. It's not a belief, it's a knowing and a presence. I enjoy this poem, and you can read it at your own leisure, because it really, in a very simple way, identifies this connection that is not really so much as one person tied to another thing, but in a more metaphorical sense, a person being a animal, being the land, being the rainfall, being the rainforest, for example. So I've gone through and I've annotated the poem, and I've made some notes around it, and I've looked at how has she exploited, interestingly, Western style of verse and songwriting to achieve her purpose, which is to, for me, challenge white Australia policy in the 20th century, this idea of that we get from the late 1800s and early 1900s of policies of breeding out the Australian Aborigine, of refusing to count them in the census, not allowing them the vote. And what she says, it's not an accusatory style of poem, but really one that asks readers to consider that you cannot eliminate Australia and its complexity, nor can you eliminate its people, because they are one and the same. That's a very broad interpretation, but I'll show you how it might work out for me in terms of achieving the task in a really shortened version. So I have to plan. I ask myself questions like why song, how song, the meaning and the everywhen, and I come up with a thesis. And of course this thesis has to be put into context. I need to establish what I understand about what the dream is and what my poet's perspective is in this poem on that dream. And for me, Maris actually challenges that dream. So my thesis might be Maris successfully illustrates for contemporary readers the eternal spirit, the everywhen of the Australian Aborigines, whose past, present and future exist within active encounters with the ancestral and natural worlds. And those are those links I was talking about before. So, my speech is structured in a really logical way. I have an introduction, 2 body paragraphs and a conclusion. In my introduction, the task requires me to set my thesis within a framework. So I won't reread the thesis, which is highlighted here, but I will read you a very brief, condensed context. So I'm looking at the indomitable spirit of Australia's Indigenous population, contrary to the 20th century dream of a white Australia, is revealed in the spiritual song of the Aborigine. Now, in a more protracted version of this oral presentation, I certainly would look at this piece in purple and extrapolate, because I need to look at what did white Australia mean, what did it mean in the 20th century, how might this poem address that particular idea. But I'm looking at what the dream is and how my poet will challenge it. And she basically says, we exist everywhere, so no matter what policies you might impose, you cannot eliminate the spirit, the existence of the Australian Aborigine. So, for this particular response, I've structured it looking at the aesthetic qualities as a way of framing my analysis. So, in body paragraph 1, I've written this: she uses rhythm to reinforce the eternal spirit of Aborigines. So that's my topic sentence. In a broader version of this, I would tie it back to this idea of dreams. The song's regular meter and end rhyme is a mellifluous pattern combining the continuation of sound and images of the natural world. So I'm explaining what it is. And in a broader version of this, I would have examples. Therefore, the rhyming of plain, rain and veins unites the earth, sky and living force that is the land and its people. Enjambment throughout supports too the seamlessly flowing, the gliding through of ideas from one line to the next, the perpetuation of the spirit of the Aborigine that cannot be stopped or eliminated and therefore challenges the dream. Okay, so I'm showing how those devices, the rhythmical quality, show me as a reader of this poem how it challenges the dream. Here's another example, much shorter. Similarly, connecting word, metaphor emphasizes the everywhen when the poet repeats, I am the natural world and I am Australia. I am, the present tense, anthropomorphizes the land which exists in all time and cannot be destroyed, as I am the land and this land is me. I arrive at a conclusion. These are the aesthetic qualities which enable Marist to reflect the impossibility of the eradication of the Australian Aborigine to advance a white Australia. Very simple, but it will show us how an oral presentation would develop.